Imagine you're a detective, and one day the FBI calls you with a question that changes everything. They ask if you can talk to a man who might have killed more people than Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer combined. You think it's impossible, you think someone's exaggerating, but then you look at the file and realize this might be real. This is not fiction, this is not a movie, this is the true story of how I spent 700 hours sitting across from most prolific serial killer in American history. My name is James Holland, I'm a Texas Ranger, and this is the story of Samuel Little. It was May 2018 when I got the call. The FBI wanted me to interview an inmate at a California state prison in the middle of the Mojave Desert. His name was Samuel Little, 78 years old, serving 3 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 3 women in Los Angeles. The FBI suspected he was connected to more cases, many more cases, but there was one massive problem. Samuel Little had never admitted to anything in his entire criminal career. Not once, not ever. Even when caught red-handed, he would deny everything until his last breath. I looked at his criminal record before flying out there, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was over 100 pages long. 100 pages of arrests spanning nearly 50 years across half the states in America. Kidnapping, assault, attempted strangulation, theft, you name it. He had been arrested in Florida, California, Texas, Ohio, Georgia, Mississippi, and at least a dozen other states. But here's the thing that caught my attention, he had a pattern. Almost every arrest involved attacking women, specifically vulnerable women, and almost every time he walked away. Charges dropped, released on bail, moved to another state. Samuel Little had been hiding in plain sight for decades. The detective from Los Angeles who finally caught him was a woman named Mitzi Roberts. She worked cold cases, and she was the one who connected him to those 3 murders using DNA evidence. When I called her before my trip, she told me 3 things about Samuel Little that I would never forget. She said he loves peanut M&Ms, he hates women, and he really hates me. I wrote those 3 things down in my notebook, and I kept thinking about them on the flight to California. When I walked into that interview room for the first time, I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I could break him down, make him confess, close some cases, and go home. I was completely wrong. The first 30 minutes were a disaster. Little was furious. He was screaming that he had been wrongly convicted, that he wasn't a rapist, that everyone had lied about him. He was pounding his fists on the table, and I could see decades of rage in his eyes. I sat there listening, and I realized something important. Mitzi Roberts had told me he hates being called a rapist. He considers that an insult to his identity. So I decided to try something different. I looked at him and I said, "Samuel, you're not a rapist. I know that. You're a killer." Something changed in that moment. His face relaxed, his posture shifted, and for the first time he looked at me like I understood him. He said, "That's right. That's what I am. I'm a killer." And just like that, the door opened. Over the next several months, I returned to that prison again and again. I spent 700 hours talking to Samuel Little. We didn't just sit in interrogation rooms. We ate oatmeal together, drank Dr. Pepper and milkshakes from Brahms, and we talked like old friends. He called me Jimmy. I called him Sammy. It sounds wrong, it sounds disturbing, and maybe it was, but it worked. Samuel Little started telling me about his victims slowly at first. He would mention one woman, then another, then another. I would take notes, ask gentle questions, never push too hard. I learned that if I pushed, he would shut down completely. So I learned to wait, to listen, to let him talk at his own pace. What I noticed very quickly was something deeply unsettling about the way he remembered these women. When Samuel talked about his victims, he would pet his face gently. He would look up and to the side, as if he was seeing something that only he could see. He told me that he has a carousel in his mind, a carousel filled with faces of the women he killed. He said the carousel spins and spins, and when it stops on one face, he remembers everything about that woman. Everything. Samuel Little has what experts call an eidetic memory, which means he remembers details most people would forget within minutes. He remembered the color of their eyes, the style of their hair, what they were wearing, what they talked about before they died. He remembered the weather that day, the street corner where he picked them up, even what they ate for their last meal. This wasn't vague recollection, this was perfect photographic memory, and it made my job both easier and more horrifying at the same time. One day, I noticed Samuel was drawing something on a piece of paper. I asked him what it was, and he said, "That's her, that's one of them." He had drawn the face of one of his victims from memory. The detail was incredible. I brought him proper drawing paper and color pencils, and I asked him to draw more. Over the following months, Samuel Little drew 16 portraits, and later, he drew 10 more for a total of 26 drawings. 26 women he had killed, women whose names nobody knew, women whose bodies had never been found or whose deaths had never been investigated as murders. As I looked at those drawings, I started to understand the genius of Samuel Little's method, and I used the word genius with absolute disgust. He was incredibly strategic about choosing his victims. He targeted women from the margins of society, women that the system had failed and forgotten. Prostitutes, drug addicts, homeless women, women estranged from their families. He knew that if these women disappeared, nobody would file a missing persons report, nobody would demand an investigation, nobody would care. And he was right. For 35 years, he traveled across America from Florida to California, from Texas to Ohio, killing women and leaving their bodies behind like trash. Most of the time, the deaths weren't even investigated as homicides. Medical examiners would write drug overdose, natural causes, or undetermined cause of death. Some bodies were never found at all. Samuel Little strangled his victims, always by hand, never with a weapon. He told me he preferred strangulation because it was intimate. He could look into their eyes. He could feel their pulse slow down and stop. He could watch the exact moment when life left their body. He said it gave him a sense of power that nothing else in his life ever gave him. He described it almost like an addiction. The more he killed, the more he needed to kill, and over 3.5 decades, that need consumed 93 lives. After several months of conversations, Samuel finally told me the number. He said, "Jimmy, I killed 93 women between 1970 and 2005. 93. I sat there in silence trying to process what I had just heard. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders. Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, was convicted of 49 murders. Samuel Little had killed more than all of them. He was the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States of America, and nobody had known until now." The FBI immediately launched a massive investigation. Special agents, analysts, local police departments from 19 different states all started combing through old files, unsolved cases, and unidentified bodies. An FBI analyst named Christy Palazzolo and a crime expert named Angela Williamson helped coordinate the effort. They would take Samuel's confessions and try to match them with real cases. The amazing and terrifying thing was that Samuel almost never lied. When he described a murder scene, his details were so accurate that investigators would find newspaper articles or police reports that matched perfectly. He described what a victim had eaten, and it matched the contents of her stomach in the autopsy report. He described the location of a body dump, and investigators would find old records showing a body had been discovered there decades ago. Angela Williamson from the Department of Justice said something that stayed with me. She said it's very hard to get people to understand just how credible this individual is. Samuel wasn't confessing to get attention or make deals. He was confessing because at 78 years old with 3 life sentences, he knew he would die in prison anyway. He had nothing to lose, and maybe for the first time in his life, he wanted someone to know what he had done. He wanted recognition for his crimes, disturbing as that sounds. By October 2019, the FBI had officially confirmed 60 of Samuel Little's murders through DNA evidence, police records, and investigative work. 60 cold cases solved. 60 families who finally got answers after decades of not knowing what happened to their mothers, daughters, sisters. But there were still 33 more cases, 33 drawings, 33 faces without names. I hung those drawings on the wall of my office, and I looked at them every single day. Someone had loved these women once. Someone had given birth to them, raised them, cared about them, and then they vanished without a trace. Samuel Little told me about one victim in particular who haunted me. He said he picked her up in Miami sometime in the early 1970s. She was young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair. She told him she was trying to get money to go home to her family. They drove to a remote area, and he strangled her. He left her body in a ditch and drove away. To him, she was just another face on the carousel, but to someone out there, she was a daughter who never came home. Her family probably spent years wondering what happened, filing missing person reports that went nowhere, hoping for a phone call that never came. Working with Samuel Little taught me something dark about the American justice system. It taught me that some victims matter more than others in the eyes of law enforcement. When a middle-class white woman goes missing, there are search parties, news coverage, FBI involvement. When a poor black or Hispanic woman from the streets goes missing, there's often barely a report filed. Samuel Little understood this better than anyone. He told me he thought he would never get caught because he thought nobody was counting his victims. And for 35 years, he was absolutely right. I kept going back to that prison, kept sitting across from Sammy, kept listening to his stories. Sometimes I felt sick doing it. Sometimes I went home and couldn't sleep because his words were echoing in my head. My colleagues asked me how I could spend so much time with a monster, and I told them because 60 families need closure. Because 33 Jane does deserve to have their names back. Because someone has to listen even when it's the hardest thing in the world to do. Samuel Little and I developed a strange relationship over those 700 hours. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something. He trusted me in a way he had never trusted anyone. He told me things he said he would never tell another soul. Sometimes he would get emotional talking about his childhood, about how his mother abandoned him, about how he grew up angry and violent and filled with hatred toward women. He blamed his mother for everything. He blamed society. He blamed everyone except himself. Even after confessing to 93 murders, Samuel Little never showed real remorse. He showed pride. On December 30th, 2020, Samuel Little died in California hospital from complications related to diabetes and heart disease. He was 80 years old. When I heard the news, I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. I felt empty. There were still 33 women whose names we didn't know. There were still families out there who would never get answers. Samuel took his final secrets to the grave, and maybe he killed even more than 93. Maybe there were victims he didn't remember or didn't want to talk about. We'll never know. The FBI still maintains a website with all of Samuel Little's drawings. They're hoping that someone somewhere will recognize one of those faces. Maybe a sister who lost contact decades ago. Maybe a daughter who never knew what happened to her mother. Maybe a friend who always wondered where someone went. Those 33 women deserve to be remembered not as Jane Doe number 7 or unidentified remains, but as human beings with names and stories and people who love them. I think about Mary Brosley sometimes. She was Samuel Little's first victim, killed on New Year's Day 1971 in Massachusetts. She was 33 years old, a mother of 2 children. She went out one night and never came home. Her son Daryl spent 50 years not knowing what happened to his mother. In 2019, he finally learned the truth. A Texas Ranger had sat down with an old man in a California prison, and that old man had confessed to killing Mary Brosley nearly half a century ago. Daryl told reporters that finally knowing gave him peace even though the answer was horrific. That's what those 700 hours were about. Not about befriending a monster or manipulating a killer. It was about giving families like Daryl's the closure they deserved. It was about making sure that 93 women whose society had forgotten would at least be counted and remembered in death. Samuel Little wanted to be famous, and in a sick way, he got his wish. But I hope his legacy isn't about him being the deadliest serial killer in American history. I hope his legacy is about the failure of our system to protect the most vulnerable and the reminder that every victim matters regardless of who they were or how they lived. When I walk past those drawings in my office, I see more than just faces. I see 93 stories that ended too soon. I see 93 families that were destroyed. I see 35 years of failure by law enforcement, including myself. We should have caught him sooner. We should have connected the dots. We should have cared more about women who lived on the margins. But we didn't, and Samuel Little knew it. He counted on our indifference, and he was right. If you recognize any of the faces in Samuel Little's drawings, if you had a mother or sister or friend who disappeared between 1970 and 2005, please contact the FBI. These women deserve their names back. They deserve to be mourned by the people who love them. They deserve more than being just another face on a killer's carousel. That's what justice really means, not just catching the killer, but remembering the victims. This is the story of Samuel Little, the man who killed 93 women and almost got away with it. This is the story of 700 hours I spent listening to the confessions of a monster. And this is the story of 93 women who deserved so much better than the life and death they got. Their names, the ones we know, should be remembered. Their faces, the ones in those drawings, should be found. Because even the worst evil in the world cannot erase the memory of its victims. That's what I believe. That's what keeps me going. And that's why I'll never stop looking at those 33 drawings on my wall, hoping that one day someone will call and say, I know her. That's my mother. That's my sister. That's my friend. Until that day comes, the carousel keeps spinning.